Hey friends, thanks for joining us on the EquippingU podcast. Our prayer is that this podcast will encourage and equip Alliance pastors and leaders to live spiritually healthy lives and lead healthy churches. For more information about the Christ-centered Acts 1-8 Alliance family, visit equippingu.org.
Hey, welcome back to EquippingU podcast. This is season 10, episode 3.
Trace.
Yes. And we're coming to you today from Columbus, Ohio area, home of Ohio State University, where the homecoming crown once went to a cow. It's true, Alan.
Somehow that's not surprising.
Yeah, voting scandal caused them to give the crown to Maudine Ormsby, a cow that had been nominated by the Agriculture Department.
Wow.
Where else would
hats off to them to that.
Where else would you learn such important information?
Nowhere.
I'm Terry, Church Ministries Leader for the Alliance.
And I'm Alan, Director of Development in the Eastern PA Alliance District.
And Alan, today we're having a conversation about conversations.
Conversations about conversations. That sounds like mind-blowing.
It does. So tell us about our guest and her book.
Well, Heather Holleman is a return guest of the podcast.
She is.
Yep, so that's pretty exciting. Her and her husband, Ashley, were back on a while ago talking about their book on evangelism, but she's back to have a conversation with us about conversations.
Yes.
And I would say that it's one of the best books I've read in the last year. It's just so practical, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Heather.
And I agree with that. It's a great book, and really encourage our readers to get it. And this interview should whet your appetite.
It should.
So grab yourself a Warhead Sour Blue Raspberry Soda.
Wow. That sounds explosive.
It does. Kind of makes your lips twitch a little bit just to think about it.
Yeah.
Sit back, relax. Here we go. And we're pleased to welcome Heather Holleman back to EquippingU podcast.
Woo-hoo!
Thanks for being a return guest, Heather.
Oh, I'm so excited for our conversation. Thanks for having me.
So we had you on the podcast in early 2022 with your husband, Ash, to discuss the book you guys co-wrote called Sent, Living a Life That Invites Others to Jesus. Our listeners should run out and buy that if they haven't already.
Yes, they should.
And so what you been up to since then?
Well, since Ash and I wrote the book Sent, a couple of cool things happened. The first was we realized that a lot of people are excited to talk about Jesus and share their faith, but they really needed more training in just how to have conversations in general. So I wrote the book called The 6 Conversations, Pathways to Connecting in an Age of Isolation and Incivility. But the other project I was really excited about is I wrote a middle grade novel called This Seat's Saved, and it's helping young people understand they're already seated at the best table with Jesus when they feel that rejection from the middle school lunchroom.
Love it.
I felt that rejection in middle school lunchroom. I'm sure you were cool, Terry, but I felt that rejection.
I don't think I was cool, Alan.
Okay, all right.
And I moved in middle school, so I showed up at some place where I knew no one.
That's a rough time to move.
It is.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I need to mail you the book immediately to heal your wound.
Yes, please do. I have many other wounds, but we won't talk about those on the podcast.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Well, that's great. So we really are excited to talk to you today about the 6 Conversations book. So in your mind, what made it important for you to write this book?
Well, there were several reasons, probably 3 main reasons. The first was, again, a lot of the people that we were training in evangelism would say, wait, can you go back a step? I don't even know how to begin talking to my neighbors, much less share anything about Jesus. So we really needed a way to help people go back to the art of conversation, because when you have a warm and loving connection with someone, talking about Jesus is never going to feel like a sales pitch or an awkward pivot in the conversation. The second motivator I had was the epidemic of loneliness. As a college professor, I was just reading report after report about the mental health issues and the physical health issues stemming from loneliness, that people don't have a warm connection, and it's really deeply affecting their health, their physical, and mental health. And so I just began to research, okay, what can we do about it, and how do you have a warm connection with someone? So the third reason was honestly the Harvard Grant study. It's the longest research study ever conducted. It's in its 85th year. And it's trying to answer the question, what's the single most determining factor of a happy life? And the answer is warm connections.
Wow.
And I read that research to my students, and they would say, well, how do we get those? How do we get those warm connections? So evangelism, my students, and just the physical impact of loneliness, which also comes out in the report from the Surgeon General, which just came out last month.
Okay.
Wow. That is great stuff.
So, Heather, what did you discover in preparing to write this book?
Well, as I surveyed all the social science research, what really excited me wasn't necessarily the practical tips that we'll get into in the interview, but just that in order to have a warm and loving connection, you really need 4 mindsets. And I'll tell you what they are, but honestly, what most excited me was that everything I'm going to say comes straight out of the Bible. So the authority of God's word and the power of God's word, it already told us what social science is now catching up to.
Great.
Okay, so in order to have that warm and loving connection with someone, you really need to be curious, believe the best, express concern, and share your life. And that comes straight out of Philippians 2, Romans 12, Galatians 6, and 1 Thessalonians.
Love it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Good stuff. We look forward to you unpacking those for us a little bit here. But, I don't think it's a hard stretch for people to resonate with the idea that our world has become more isolated and uncivil. But how do you think a book about having conversations is going to be helpful in addressing those problems?
Well, what happens when you have these mindsets, it helps you understand how to approach people. Like you're getting out of the realm of argument and suspicion, and you're really moving into biblical ways of connecting with people. And what's hard is a lot of people, really, it's an issue of Christian maturity. When I read the research on the 4 mindsets, I thought, okay, I need to grow in these areas. So, for example, people are not very curious. They're completely self-obsessed. And if you think about Philippians 2, where Paul says, take on the interests of other people or carrying each other's burdens, in Galatians 6, how do you do that if you don't ask people loving and generous questions about their life? And it's called a closeness-enhancing behavior to ask a curious question.
Fancy.
Also, most people don't believe the best. My students, if I say, when you meet someone, are you believing the best about them? And they say no. I'm wondering, what do they believe about vaccines? Did they mask? What did they think about Roe v. Wade? Who did they vote for in the 2020? I mean, we're suspicious. We're judging people instead of living out Romans 12, which is actually a deeply convicting passage about blessing those who persecute you and actually loving people who you would consider your enemies.
Wow.
So you write about these 4 mindsets that help us have loving conversations. How about unpacking those for us a bit, Heather?
Well, what is shocking to me is how people are not curious. My students will say, yeah, I went on a date and the guy did not ask me one question about my life. Or I'll talk to people at church who'll go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and say they haven't seen their family for a year. And they'll say, my family did not ask me one thing.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. Have you guys experienced that? Like you're out with a couple, they don't ask you one thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, once my husband and I spent 8 hours with this very godly couple. We were so excited because we thought this is just going to be the best day. You guys, they did not ask us one question about our life. Yeah. We left feeling so lonely, so disconnected. So what I love about curiosity, so the research term is interpersonal curiosity. When you are curious about other people, you're not only living out Paul's command in Philippians 2 and Galatians to carry each other's burdens because you're asking questions. But it is so good for your mental health. And the research shows that when you're curious, your marriages are stronger, your relationships with your children will be stronger. There's really no reason not to ask good questions. And so by the end of this interview, of course, I'm going to give your listeners 6 ways to be curious about other people so you'll never get lost starting or continuing a loving conversation.
Yeah.
Now, believing the best is a disposition of the heart. And actually, I get a lot of pushback on this. I would love your perspective on this. People are saying, no, it's our job in the culture, to win arguments and to expose evil and to hate people who aren't, voting the way we are or whatever. But as I thought deeply about that, our battle is not with flesh and blood. It's with the enemy. And so I like to look at my neighbors and say, people are not the enemy. Satan is actually the enemy here.
Right.
Yep.
So when I'm approaching someone who like voted differently or believes something different socially or, on all sorts of social issues, when you believe the best, what you're doing is you're believing that the person in front of you is a child made in the image of God who has infinite value. There's no one else like this person. They have a one-of-a-kind viewpoint on the universe. They can teach you something. And when you ask someone, let's say, for example, you believe they're your enemy because they believe something different from you, what if you said instead, I can tell you care so passionately about this issue. I would love for you to tell me the story of when you first started caring about this. That is a loving connection, much different from I'm going to condemn you and we're never going to be friends. So I've learned to do that in my neighborhood with people who are profoundly different from Ashley and me. And then expressing concern, I'm not talking about taking on everyone's problems. I want people to know 3 things about your neighbors, your daughter, your husband, your pastor. Here's what you need to know about people. What are their major stressors? What's their next biggest decision they're trying to make? What thought is keeping them up at night? If you ask people those questions, what you can do is write down, or if you have a good memory, just remember those things and ask about them. Just say, hey, how is that going for you? And decision making is very stressful, especially for people who've had a lot of adversity or trauma backgrounds. If you say, hey, are you trying to make a hard decision? Can I help you think through that? It is the most loving way to support people.
Yeah.
And then sharing your life. A lot of people don't do that. They're really good at believing the best, being curious, expressing concern. But if you don't share your life, it's not a conversation, it's an interview.
Yeah,
Good point.
That's a really good point there,
Yeah.
because curiosity, if it doesn't have that other elements, it can look like just an interview. You're trying to get information, whatever the case like that. So curiosity driven by believing the best and mutual concern and all that is powerful stuff, no doubt. I think about the conversations that I've had about politics, which is, of course, where a lot of incivility can creep in. Oftentimes people think because somebody has a different view than I do that they hate our country or something like that. That never helps a conversation, right? We have to assume that even if we completely disagree about what they want for our country, that they're not trying to destroy our country. For some reason, they think that is the best thing for our country. And it's safe for us to assume that in almost all situations, even if we completely disagree with them.
That's a great point. I bet you if you drill down deeper, you probably actually share core values with that person that you're arguing with. That's a great point. That's right.
Yeah, I appreciate
You
that.
should write a book on that, Alan.
No, Heather already did a good job. I'm just going to let her go with it. So I've recommended. I'm telling. I've probably recommended this book to more than anybody to any other book in the last 3 years.
It's great.
I love it.
Well, that means a lot to me. It's changed my life. The research, and reading the scriptures through this lens has really changed how I interact with people.
Yeah. It's so practical, and it's not that long. So it's not like I have to recommend, I can read a great book that's, 300 pages. And I'm like, how do I recommend that to somebody? Most people aren't going to read that, but your book is so practical, so insightful, and yet not that long so that it feels like it's a burden to get through it.
Excellent book.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you. And it's not academic. I don't know how many of you have read great books, but they're just over your head.
Yeah.
That happens to me sometimes. I'm like, this is too academic. No, you're not going to read all the social science research.
Right.
I did that for you. You can read it you can read it in the footnotes, but it's going to read, kind of at an 8th grade level. Your kids can read it. In fact, a lot of young people are reading it.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools, public schools are reading this book.
Yeah.
Penn State, I've done seminars for them and corporate settings. It's really practical. It can be used, even though it's deeply Christian, a lot of organizations are using it because it's wisdom literature and really helping intervene in this loneliness epidemic.
Fantastic.
Yeah, keep thinking about, and I'm going to do it. You can ask me about it sometime. Boy, I just put it out. I just put myself on the spot. I want to have a neighborhood book study in my neighborhood, offering people to talk about this book because.
Oh, you should. You should, because it'll help their marriages. It will help connect, especially if they've got teenagers or young people. A lot of people will say, grandparents in particular will say, Heather, okay, I'm going out to lunch with my grandkids. Where should I start? What questions should I ask? I never know how to talk to them. So this is a great book if people feel like they just don't have good family conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that, sometimes it takes intentionality, right? And I think most people feel like conversations, if they're intentional, aren't really good conversations, but I don't think that's true. that you talk about having the 3 goals for our conversation. So talk about those and kind of unpack those for us.
Oh my goodness. This was such a joyful discovery for me that when you're trying to make your warm and loving connection, a lot of people don't know where conversations should end. Like, what's the point of my connecting with you? Okay, well, listen to this. You'll love this. What if every conversation you had, every interaction, the goal, the 3 fresh goals was to do one of 3 things. You want to encourage that person. You want to help that person with whatever personal goals or projects they share with you, or lead them to a state of marveling or awe. Now, that's not even from the Bible. This is, even though we see all those verses, spur one another on towards love and good deeds, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what's helpful for encouraging each other. But the research shows that when you do that, it's called supportive interaction. And the research on leading to marveling is so wonderful that if you're with someone and you talk about divine activity, like if you say, oh, I don't think that was a coincidence, that really feels like God was showing his love to you, or say you're in front of the Grand Canyon together or looking at the night sky and you begin marveling about our creator God. The research shows that when you do that with someone, you're less lonely. You're also less depressed and anxious because the brain was actually wired to enjoy marveling and really worship. It shows you how God made us to worship him.
Yeah. Love it.
Excellent.
Love it.
So, Heather, what pitfalls do we often encounter as we seek to have these connecting conversations?
I change my answer a lot on this as I've been observing people. I used to think that it was like complaining and gossiping, but I don't know what you guys think. I think arrogance and advice giving is so difficult. Like when you're with someone and it's sort of like when someone's acting superior and that pride they have that they're always right and they're going to give you advice about everything. Most people do not want advice. And how I discovered this is when people ask or they're sharing something in conversation and I say, I have a thought for you. I have advice. Would you want my advice or would you rather me keep asking you good questions? Okay, nobody wants my advice. They want me to keep talking and asking them good questions. So it's a way of honoring other people. And so that's what I would say right now. But of course, there are things you want to avoid just as you grow in maturity as a believer. Gossip and complaining, having that divisive spirit. I was amazed when I looked at Galatians 5, the fruit of the flesh. I mean, I'm bad with math, but I think over 65% of evidence of the flesh is divisive things. Factions, dissensions, envy. So you want to avoid those things. But I would say don't give advice and don't be arrogant. And the way you prevent that is have what I call just a teachable spirit. Believe that person can teach you something and that they have a one-of-a-kind viewpoint on the universe. And they can also reveal something to you about God that only they can reveal because of how God made them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, you made me think of 2 lunch conversations I had in the last few years where we kind of started out with the other person touting the greatness of their resume. And when I'm on the other end of that conversation, I shut down.
I do too. I do too.
Yeah,
it's
like
terrible.
I'm done with this. So I want to guard against that in my own life. That I'm not gonna be the one sitting and touting my resume and all the good things I've done and how smart I am.
Yeah,
that's
Alan
good.
Yeah, it's tempting though.
Yeah, that's right. That's my goal to help with that, Terry. Absolutely, that's my goal to help with that. So this might be shocking to Terry, but I learned from
Surely not.
I learned from your book that my face matters.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, I've read a lot about. I mean, almost everybody talks about eye contact, right? I mean, you learn about that in coaching, you learn about that in conversations. Really, eye contact's a big deal, but you don't hear much about the whole face. So why does our face matter in our conversations, and maybe some other conversation tips that we could remember and practice?
One thing I learned was my face, when I show interest in someone, I tend to scrunch up my eyebrows, like furrow my eyebrows and lean in. Well, that's a very aggressive and angry look. So what you want is to practice raising your eyebrows, lifting your chin, leaning back. It shows warmth, openness, and interest. but I really had to change my face because when I'm thinking, I tend to scrunch up my eyes and I'm just thinking. And a lot of times people say, Heather, why are you so mad right now? And I'm like, I'm not mad. I'm just interested in what you're saying. So just raise your eyebrows, lift your chin up a little bit. It shows interest and warmth. And then you don't have to lean forward. You can, but sometimes if you lean back, it shows just this like, okay, come into my presence. I'm open. So good. Also you want to do that. And eye contact's important, but it's okay not to have constant eye contact. It can sometimes feel overwhelming for certain types of people. But the one thing that is important is that you're not looking at your phone while you're talking to them. So put the phone away, make a point of putting the phone on do not disturb. Don't even have the phone present on the table. There's a research study that says that even the presence of a cell phone hinders like that warm connection because it's so distracting just to have it there. So give someone your full attention, show them with raised eyebrows, tilted up chin. You could even practice talking in the mirror to see how you come off to people. And smile. You guys we can do this. We can do this. So it's easy tips.
When I read your line in there about scrunching your eyes, I thought, oh my word, I'm an eye scruncher.
Yeah. Are you an eye scruncher?
Oh, 100%. Okay. And I lean in
I'm a scruncher.
And I scrunch my eyes. Like and I think that's telling people that I'm thinking about what they're saying. But in reality, it looks like I'm analyzing what they're saying and possibly ready to disagree with it. And I never thought of that until I read that in your book. And honestly, now I'm sitting back in conversations. I'm putting my eyebrows up. And I'm noticing that there's a lot of other eye scrunchers in the world.
A lot of eye scrunchers.
And I'm noticing how it makes me feel. It doesn't really – I don't always interpret it negatively, but as I've observed it, I realize it's not helping the conversation. Even if it's mid-range, it's still not helping advance the conversation.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, do you ever notice when this is challenging me, like when you're with someone where you do feel that warm connection and you're really enjoying them, look at what their face is doing, and that will tell you the truth of the research. Yeah. I like that. Like you're noticing face scrunching, and I never thought of that before, that it's analytical. Yeah. It's like you're in the realm of judgment already. Yes. That is so smart. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's really – so thank you for that, to rescue me from my eye scrunching. Much appreciated.
The cell phone thing, you stopped preaching and went to meddling, Heather, and if we sing I Surrender All right now, I'm going to the altar.
Okay, so sounds great. I noticed that our producer Isaac had his on his table right now, and he put it in his pocket while you were talking.
I'm guilty.
Do it. I mean, just try it. Plus, it helps me. I'm distracted. And plus, it was funny when I was reading the research on that. I was talking to a student, and we were having a great connection, and his phone went off, and he literally like stuck his finger up in the air, like, wait 1 minute, Dr. H. And then he started, he had to answer the call, and then he was like checking, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok or whatever. I was so frustrated. Yeah, I was like, I feel so unimportant right now. Yeah. And it was just remember how it feels when someone is constantly on the phone. And that happened recently with the friend that I was spending the day with. She probably answered 40 texts while we were in the car on the way to lunch, as she's driving, first of all. So I was like, I do not feel safe right now, emotionally or physically.
No, I hear you. It's easy to fall into the trap, though, so quickly. And you say you're going to check one thing, you got a text, and maybe it was from somebody really important. Maybe you needed to hear something from your spouse, and you get it. But then, but there's a text from my friend. Oh, and there's a notification. Before you know it, you're doing a bunch of other things. I say a statement to myself frequently, and I need to say it even more than I do, is my phone is my servant, not my master.
Yeah.
I have to remember
it's becoming a problem. You don't need to be constantly available to people, and you only need to check your phone once a day. Yeah. Go back to the 80s when we had nobody knew where anyone was. Yeah. Right. We weren't available to people all day long. No. So, yeah.
And you can have a signal like with somebody like I have with my wife. If she needs to get a hold of me, she calls twice in a row.
We do the same thing. Right. We do the same thing.
Right. And then I know, this is the second call. I need to get that, But
yeah, and with my girls, I am completely interruptible. And I tell my students that. I'm like, look, if my girls are going to call me, they're allowed to. There are going to be people in your life that are allowed to interrupt you. Yeah. And so I'm like, you can always interrupt me.
Yep, 100%. So. Yep. Fantastic. Well, I'm just glad to know that my face matters, Terry.
Yeah. I can say some things about your face, Alan, but I'm going to be nice
Thank
today.
you. I appreciate that.
Because I'm a Christian.
Well, we always say that we have a face for radio. So.
We do.
And now we're on video, so...
So you give some good tips about spark questions and numbers questions in the book, Heather. Talk to us about those things.
Well, what's great is after you get the mindsets down and the 3 fresh goals, then you can do all these fun things with these 6 categories of conversations, which are, social, emotional, physical, cognitive, volitional, and spiritual, which we can talk about surely if there's time. But the spark questions are questions that are inherently pleasurable for people. And this comes out of Vanessa Edwards. So I did not think of this. I definitely cite her in the book, but it's this idea of asking questions that make people happy. Like, hey, what are you celebrating? Or, tell me about your week. What's the best restaurant you've been to lately? Or have you seen any great movies? Or, what's made you laugh recently? So those are fun questions that make people happy because you're talking about happy things. That would be in the emotional category of conversation. The numbers question I love. This is great for introverts or young people who don't want to, and they don't want to engage the brain. They're tired. They don't want to be talking about all these things. So what you can do is ask a numbers question. So for example, your teenager gets in the car, you can say, instead of how was your day, which is an existential question with the terrible weak verb, you can say, hey, what kind of day were you having on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, how they answer is actually not important. It's your next question. So say my daughter gets in the car. I say, what kind of day are you having on a scale of 1 to 10? And she says a 4, meaning 10 is the best, 0 is the worst. Then the next question is, what would have had to happen to make it a 10? You're going to learn more about your child, more about your spouse, more about anyone. I ask my students, okay, a scale of 1 to 10. I put it up on the board. What kind of day are we having? They say, okay, turn to the person beside you. What's going to have to happen to make this day a 10? It's such a fun conversation. Also, if you're stuck, and I use this all the time in conversation if I'm stuck. Say I just met someone and I want to do like a social question because people like talking about their friends. And I found out they went to the wrestling game. I'll say, hey, how many people do you have season tickets for? It's a numbers question, easy to answer. Like, oh, I have 4 season tickets. Or how long have you been an accountant? So say you're with someone at a party. And by the way, this is Jerry Seinfeld's best tip. If you read the book, you'll see him footnoted here because he has to meet so many thousands of people a year as a comedian. He'll always go to the numbers question. He'll say, hey, how long did it take you to get here? Or if you meet someone and they're like, yeah, I'm an accountant. How long have you been an accountant? Easy questions to answer. Do a numbers question.
Good. That's great. I love it. So how long have you been married to Ash?
We're going on our 23rd year.
Wow.
I love it. I think for our anniversary, I want to get Adirondack chairs for the front yard. Not the backyard, the front yard by the sidewalk, so I can talk to all the neighbors walking their dogs and the little kids learning to ride their bikes.
Little Jonathan Weibel influence there, it sounds to me. Front
Yep.
yard.
Yep. I have Adirondack chairs on our front porch for that exact reason. And we've had more conversations with our neighbors just by putting those on our front porch than all the years we lived in our house before that. It's been amazing.
Yes, that's what I want to do. Later, will you tell me what brand you got so I know what to order? It is at Amazon Prime. We're talking... I got to put my order in.
I got them off Amazon, so I can send that information to you quickly later at lunchtime.
That's fun.
No, it is fun. And, my wife actually teases me for asking, I didn't call them these before, but spark questions. We had our neighbors over for pizza the other night, and I asked, what's the first song that you remember liking?
Oh, I love that question. I ask my students that all the time.
It was so funny. I mean, the conversations we then had about those songs, the husband answered Uptown Girl by Billy Joel, and then that led us to playing a bunch of Billy Joel songs on Spotify. And then I said The Gambler, and they're like, oh, that is a funny song. I remember that. And this is like a 5-minute conversation about music that was just fun.
Yep.
So
people love talking about music.
Yeah.
My students laugh so hard because Thriller by Michael Jackson was my first album, and I love Michael Jackson. So they always laugh. This was in 1985. I was 10 years old. Bought that album with my own money. You can learn a lot about people when you ask about music.
You sure can.
Joy to the world.
Yeah.
All the boys and girls.
That was yours?
1969, I believe.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah. 3 Dog Night.
3 Dog Night. Yep. Wow, how about that? Okay, we are sparked there, so that's good. So let's bring it home. You referenced the 6 conversations. We do have time for you to unpack those a little bit. So rather than just list them, give us a little brief description of each one.
So easy. It's so easy. You're going to wonder why you didn't learn this in kindergarten. In fact, a lot of parents are teaching their kindergartners. When you meet someone, you no longer have to ask about sports, the weather, or how are you. You have 6 categories based on the 6 dimensions of what it means to be human. Social. People love to talk about their friends. I won't say to someone, how are you? I'll say, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Who have you been spending time with? Young people love to talk about their friends. Don't forget animal friends. I have had more amazing conversations with the 3rd grader next door just by asking what animal friends she's been spending time with. The next category is emotional. You can ask people, how are you doing? But I recommend getting rid of that weak verb and just say, hey, what's challenged you about your week? What surprised you about your summer so far? Don't forget the power of the physical category. This includes your body and physical spaces. So I often won't start a conversation with, hey, how are you? I'll say, oh, it's so good to see you. How did you sleep last night? Let me tell you about how I've been sleeping. People love to talk about sleep. When I asked my students, how have you guys been sleeping? I learned more about like ASMR, melatonin, lavender. They went on and on. People like to talk about their aches and pains, like how is your knee doing? How's your arthritis? Don't forget that. And also physical spaces. I was having a really hard time connecting with a colleague. And all I said was, are you doing any home improvements? How's your garden? 45 minutes later, I had an invitation out to the garden. You want to ask people about physical things related to their body, physical spaces. That's also the 5 senses. So that would include music. What have you been listening to? The spark questions, restaurants. Cognitive. This is my favorite category. I love asking people, what have you been thinking about? So when and it's because I'm an academic. So when I see people at Penn State, instead of saying, how was your summer? I'm going to say, it's good to see you. What have you been thinking about lately? And I learn more about the cool things on people's minds. Now, that's a stressful question probably for younger people. Or my husband, for example, does not like that category. He'd rather me ask about the projects he's working on around the house. And he loves systems, like work systems. But don't forget to ask people, hey, what have you been thinking about? Or what did you think about this thing that happened? Like, I'd love to know your thoughts on whatever it is. The last 2 categories are so great and people forget about them. Volitional, that relates to human volition. That's our will. It's a fancy word for your ability to make decisions. Instead of asking someone like, oh, I saw you got that boat, ask them, hey, tell me the story. Like, how'd you decide to buy that boat? Or how did you guys decide to go on vacation at the beach instead of the lake? Or, hey, do you have any upcoming decisions you're making? People love to talk about the volitional category. So even like with complimenting someone about their outfit, which women do all the time, I won't say like, oh, I love that jean jacket. I'll be like, I may offer a compliment, like I love that jean jacket, but I'll say, how did you decide to get that one instead of this other brand? Ask about decisions.
Yeah.
Finally, the spiritual category, which is my favorite besides cognitive. And that's just, people like to talk about spiritual things. We act like they don't. But if you're near a religious holiday and you say to someone, hey, do you have any religious traditions? Or tell me about your spiritual rituals. Have you started any spiritual practices? People love to talk about those things. I've been talking to people about Jesus for 30 years.
Yeah.
I will say to them, does it bother you that I talk so much about Jesus? Nobody has ever said, yes, would you stop talking? They all say, no, I want to hear more. Keep talking about spiritual things. And because you have that warm and loving connection, because of the 4 mindsets and the 3 fresh goals, people are going to listen to you. Yeah. It won't feel awkward.
Yeah, that's good. That is good stuff.
So certainly Jesus was amazing at conversation. And so, Heather, where do we start if we want to love people through conversation like Jesus did?
Well, I was thinking about that question this morning, and one thing as I think about Jesus is he wants to bring people to spiritual truth. He wants to help them see clearly. So how do you do that? Asking people good questions, good loving questions, is a way of helping them understand their lives, what they're going through. It helps them understand how to connect with you. And we're made in the image of God. We're relational. So when we're asking loving questions, and remember, Jesus asked questions in every category of what it means to be human. It's actually a very sacred space. We're entering into something that God designed us for. So to become more like Jesus, you're going to ask questions. You're going to live out Philippians 2. You're going to humble yourself. You're going to bless those who persecute you. You're going to know that people are not the enemy, but Satan's the enemy. And you're going to realize God, it's not an accident where he placed you, where you live, where you work. And you're going to live out what Jesus is doing, which is seeking and saving the lost.
Amen.
Fantastic.
Preach. I love it.
Well, we really appreciate you coming back on, Heather. As a repeat guest on Equipping You podcast, you are automatically inducted into the Equipping You podcast Hall of Fame. And
I love it. Where's my trophy? Where's my plaque?
It's a plaque, not a trophy.
We'll get that to you. Do you have any, words of acceptance that you would like to share with us before we say goodbye?
Words of acceptance?
To
accept my award.
Yeah.
No, you know what I want to share is the one thing I forgot to say in this interview. Okay. The 6 categories of conversations are not just for starting conversation. The reason why it's so powerful, you'll never get stuck again, because after you ask the first question, you have endless combinations of where to go next.
Love it.
Wow.
Don't forget that. So if you ask someone, did you go to the basketball game? And they say yes, you have 6 pathways of how to be curious.
Yeah.
Who did you go with? How did your body feel watching that game on those hard bleachers? How did you decide to get those tickets? Do you ever pray? Do you have spiritual rituals at the game? Guys, you're going to love it. It's a game changer.
Good questions.
It is
great.
a game changer. And listeners, you have to read this book. And if it's not one of the top 3 books that you've read this year, after you read it, I will personally apologize to you for recommending
I thought you were going to pay for the book.
Okay, wow.
I can't afford to make that offer because, Yeah.
Okay, I love what you just said so much. I want to print that out and put you're literally giving a money back guarantee.
Yeah.
You're like that personal apology if this is not the best thing you've ever read. That means a lot to me. That's a sweet thing to say.
Well, it's true. I'm not exaggerating. So
great to have you on, Heather. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of July.
Excellent episode.
Oh my word, it was fantastic.
So I often think of the value of asking good questions, and Heather just expands that exponentially.
Yeah, it's like a new universe
of what directions you can go with questions. But honestly, what she said today. Occasionally, you sit through a conversation with a person and they don't ask you one thing about yourself, and that does not feel good.
It
when
is
you walk
so
away.
demotivating. You're
It
like,
is.
do I matter at all? We just talked for an hour about you, and you didn't ask a single thing about me.
Yeah. So asking questions is amazing foundation for having good conversations, and having good conversations is foundational for building relationships, and building relationships is foundational for talking to people about Jesus.
Amen. Amen to that. But I love how she gave us all kinds of help so we don't get stuck in conversations, right?
Yeah.
It's sometimes you have a great start to a conversation and it's like, where do I go next?
Yeah.
Or it just goes flat.
Yeah.
And boy, this stuff is really good. I highly recommend it. And want to encourage you to read it, start practicing it. I've actually started thinking through some of those things intentionally, and I find that the more I do that, the more I do them naturally then.
Yeah, it's good.
So
thanks for listening. We appreciate you and hope this was helpful to you. Next time on episode 4, we'll have Jim Putman, and Alan's going to give you just a little snippet about Jim.
I am. Jim is part of the Relational Discipleship Network, pastor in Idaho, and he's written a great book. It's now actually 10 years old, called Discipleship. And our listeners are going to enjoy a thorough conversation about making disciples because, we all want to do that, but then we just get ambiguous and not sure how to accomplish it. Jim's going to help us with that.
Good. So we hope you'll join us for that episode. Meanwhile, keep the faith.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Equipping You podcast. If you liked this episode, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend. For more information about this podcast and other ministries of the Alliance, visit EquippingU.org.